Our first speaker on this panel is Dr. Tara Richards. She is an assistant professor in the School of Criminology and Criminal Justice at University of Nebraska, Omaha. She has conducted national and state-based research on campus gender-based violence and served for 4 years as faculty representative on her campus's Title IX leadership team. Today she'll speak about campus gender-based violence.
Good morning. In 1997, the Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights first issued guidance on institutions' obligations to respond to sexual harassment as a form of sex-based discrimination under Title IX. Since that time, we've made great strides in our campus responses, but victimization surveys indicate that gender-based violence is still a significant issue among college students. Today, I will make several policy-driven recommendations to improve this issue. First, while federal guidance specifies a range of protections for students, nationally representative studies indicate that many institutions have not fully implemented a number of these provisions. For example, in 2015, 33% of institutions still failed to identify a Title IX coordinator. 30% did not notify students about interim measures such as academic or housing accommodations, and 23% did not notify students that they could assist in making a report to law enforcement. These data indicate that many institutions still need help implementing federal requirements. However, Title IX, the Clery Act, and Campus Save are unfunded mandates that require institutions to hire staff and provide resources that are outside of their core educational mission. In addition, state-based education budgets continue to shrink. More federal resources must be expended on combating campus gender-based violence. The Campus Accountability and Safety Act, or CASA, includes several provisions that advance the goals of increased training and provide additional resources. This legislation would, for example, direct the Secretary of Education to develop online training materials for staff at institutions of higher education. It also calls for additional resources for training through increases in campus grant funding. Further, proposed amendments to the Higher Education Act would authorize the Secretary of Education to use funds collected under the HEA's penalty provisions to award competitive grants to campuses to respond to gender-based violence. But training on compliance is only the first step. Monitoring and accountability are also necessary. Currently, the Office for Civil Rights only completes investigations, and we only see civil litigation after non-compliance has led to the deprivation of students' rights. More effort must be made to prevent non-compliance, and mechanisms for holding institutions accountable must be strengthened. For example, New York State recently completed an audit of all New York institutions of higher education, which required New York schools to submit documentation regarding their compliance with both state and federal policies for campus sexual misconduct. Importantly, data for each institution is publicly available on New York's Office of Campus Safety's website. Efforts must be made to scale up such innovative strategies so that every institution is this transparent. Further, increased penalties for institutions that demonstrate a pattern of discrimination against students is warranted. Currently, the Office for Civil Rights can withhold federal funds, but they cannot fine institutions. CASA would authorize the Secretary of Education to impose civil penalties on institutions that fail to uphold key provisions. And again, recommended amendments to the Higher Education Act would authorize civil penalties for institutions that violate or fail to carry out Title IX requirements. We also need better data collection and dissemination tools. Currently, most of our information on incidents of campus sexual misconduct come from an institution's annual security report, which relies on data from campus law enforcement or other security personnel. However, sexual misconduct is notoriously underreported, and research demonstrates that the number of incidents publicly reported in annual security reports is often much lower than the number internally reported to Title IX coordinators. For example, a 2016 study commissioned by the National Institute of Justice found that only 67% of rape students at 9 institutions said they reported to campus security officials actually showed up in the campus crime statistics. In my own research of 42 institutions in a mid-Atlantic state, annual security reports only captured about half the incidents of sexual assault and only about a third of the incidents of other sexual misconduct that were reported to Title IX coordinators. Both Maryland and New York have addressed these limitations by requiring institutions to report aggregate data on sexual misconduct reported to Title IX coordinators and the resolution of these reports to their state's higher education commission. Again, this data is publicly available on their state commission's web pages. Legislators in Louisiana, New Jersey, Minnesota, and Pennsylvania, among others, have proposed similar legislation. Importantly, these state-based strategies are based on data that is already required to be collected by Title IX coordinators under Title IX requirements. We need a national solution. We need this data to be publicly available at every institution. At the same time, the utility of annual security reports for understanding sexual misconduct could be improved by expanding the offenses for which data on arrest and referrals for disciplinary action are presented to include sex offenses, dating violence, domestic violence, and stalking. Currently, annual security reports only include this information for liquor law violations, drug abuse violations, and illegal weapons possessions. The inclusion of arrests and disciplinary actions for sexual misconduct would provide greater transparency regarding university responses, as well as an incentive for campus officials to take these incidents seriously. Congress can and should amend the Clery Act to expand these provisions. Finally, we must continue to strengthen access to reporting as well as interim measures and services to students. Research continues to find that sexual assault is the most underreported of all violent crimes, and when sexual assault is reported, arrests are only made in about 35% of cases. Dating violence, domestic violence, and stalking are similarly underreported and underpoliced. Likewise, the limited existing research on cases of sexual misconduct reported to Title IX coordinators demonstrates that only about 25% of cases are formally investigated and adjudicated. Only about half of cases that are investigated result in a finding of responsibility, and only about half of responsible students are either suspended or expelled. As such, when incidents of sexual misconduct are reported to Title IX coordinators, the primary outcome is services to victims, not punishments to alleged perpetrators. As such, we must act to strengthen access to reporting, a fair disciplinary process, and interim measures. Federal requirements regarding amnesty policies for all students who make good faith efforts to report, a uniform process for student disciplinary proceedings, and requirements for memorandums of understanding with both law enforcement and community-based service providers like rape crisis centers and legal services would be significant for advancing these goals. Thank you.